speaker who just arrived this Monday officially at the U of A from the University of Utah. I understand this is his first presentation, so we're honored to have him. At the University of Utah, he was a presidential professor emeritus. He is widely known for his work in applied demographic and economic analysis and metropolitan development patterns. He is also the founding co-director of the Master of Real Estate program from the University of Utah. For the past 30 years, he has conducted pioneering research in smart growth, public facility finance, economic development, and metropolitan development patterns. He has written over 20 books. In 2000, his professional planning, education, and research accomplishments were recognized with election to the College of Fellows of the American Institute of Certified Planners. And also in 2000 to 2001, he served as a HUD expert on smart growth for both the Clinton and Bush administrations. In this capacity, he helped expand HUD's university scholarship programs and created HUD's doctoral fellowship program. He has served on various editorial capacities, such as the Journal of American Planning, Housing and Policy Debate, Journal of Urban Affairs, and the Journal of Planning, Education, and Research. And today, he will unveil his long-term assessment of housing needs based on demographic and economic drivers, as well as development and redevelopment opportunities into the future. Would you please give a warm Tucson welcome to Dr. Arthur C. Nelson, who likes to go by Chris.
I was told I had 3 hours to make this presentation.
3 credits.
Yeah, 3 credits. I can actually go on for 2 or 3 or 4 hours with the stuff I have just on Tucson. I'd like to do that at some point in time. I have a formal presentation, but I'm going to diverge sometimes to talk with you about some emerging research. You have this map on your table, the streetcar. I run a research operation that's national in scope that is looking at the economic development outcomes of all fixed guideway systems in the U.S. built after 1970. This is bus rapid transit, this is light rail, this is commuter rail, this occasionally some heavy rail, and now increasingly streetcar. What I'm finding is I'm amazed at how the market responds to fixed transportation investments, which is funny because I'm an economic geographer by background. I should know this stuff. But the market is very, very responsive to public investment in these kinds of things. So at some point in time, sooner than later, I want to help you think through the investment, development, redevelopment opportunities around the streetcar, and also your other emerging modes of transportation here. The bus rapid transit is something that you should take a hard look at as well for larger reach transportation opportunities. I do publish, so I don't perish. I figure the longer I publish, the farther away in the future I'll have well, whatever, I won't go down that road. So a couple of years ago, I wrote a book with Robert Lang. We were both in at Virginia Tech, and the book was called Megapolitan America. In this book, we are reinventing how America's economy is structured or is restructuring. We have in the U.S. today about 23 megapolitan regions. Megapolitan means multiple metropolitan areas that are in sync with each other. So you are part of what we call the Sun Corridor megapolitan area. And though you might not like the idea, you are in sync economically with Phoenix. And I'll talk about some of the numbers behind that momentarily. What's interesting to me is that not all metropolitan areas are assigned to a megapolitan area. For example, in Missouri, we have Kansas City and St. Louis. And I did a presentation on this idea in Kansas City, and I had some people asking me in Kansas City, why aren't we megapolitan too? Because we meet all the criteria, at least 4 million people by 2040 and on down the line. I say, When was the last time you actually went to St. Louis? Oh, 3 or 4 years ago? I rest my case. The economies in Missouri are split between St. Louis and Kansas City to such an extent they do not communicate. They do not network. Same with Nashville and Memphis in Tennessee. So what we have in this country here is growing megapolitan envy, and the Kansas City people want me to declare them megapolitan so they can join the rest of the crowd, and they're asking me how much will it cost them to write my next book that will have megapolitan Kansas City. Well, I'm expensive. A book I published last year that I'll draw a lot of information from for this presentation is Reshaping Metropolitan America. It's looking to the year 2030. My presentation today will actually go to 2040 for the Tucson and Phoenix areas. But Reshaping Metropolitan America talks to the tremendous amount of mostly redevelopment that will take place in this country between now and 2030. Half of America's built non-residential landscape is going to be rebuilt between 2010 and 2030. Half. That's a tremendous opportunity all around the country, and I focus part of my book on that. I have a book coming out, I think, next month. That's what the publisher says. Foundations of Real Estate to Development Financing, a guide to public-private partnerships. My wife read the book. She edited the book. It wasn't forced labor. She volunteered to do it. But she said, after she read the book, she said, I'm missing a word in the title. The title should be A Practical Guide to Public-Private Partnerships, because I show you how these things can work and what tools are available and how they can be used in tandem to create redevelopment opportunities. In addition, the book has a 15 or so worksheet workbook behind it that gives you the formulas, gives you the templates to do your own redevelopment analysis. So today I'm going to talk about trends and preferences, opportunities, and so forth that we're seeing in the Tucson area. I'll throw in Phoenix just because it's up there north and kind of lurks around the state. We're slowly coming out of the thing called the Great Recession. We all know that. It's taken us a long time to get out of this thing. We're still getting out of it. My sense is we'll still be sort of inching our way out of this Great Recession to the end of this decade. Tucson will fare a lot better than other parts of the country. Most of the country will feel the effects of the recession well into the 2020s, if not, in fact, forever. Part of that reason is because we've gone through economic restructuring, and a lot of metropolitan areas simply don't have the resilience built in to go with the punches and reform and recast themselves to move on. Tucson is blessed in the sense that it is resilient. But a lot of things are happening in the housing market. We all know that. You know that probably far better than I do. But what I'm seeing in terms of preferences and finances and household choice patterns and so on and so forth, we're looking at an era of mostly smaller homes, probably more people per home, smaller lots, more attached units, and a lot more renters. And I'll show you those numbers for this metropolitan area as well. So here are the big numbers, the way I have them. Everybody has their forecasts. I have my own, thank you very much. Mine are, of course, always accurate. So here we see population for the US and Arizona, Tucson, and what's that little tiny thing there? It's actually around the flag. You can't even see it from my angle. So Tucson is about 1 million people, going on to about 1.5 million people by 2040, give or take a little bit here and there. Population change. Well, we all know we're growing, and actually you're also blessed in the sense you're not having explosive growth. You're not doing a Las Vegas where suddenly you have 100,000 people in 2 years to accommodate, and then the market crashes, and they're still there. You don't have that issue here as much. But let's look at one of the interesting trends, the people over 65. Now, of course, Tucson is attracting people over 65, and people turning 65 tend to stay here more than other places. So here we see between 2010 and 2040 that about 38% of the share of the population change in Tucson will be those over 65. That's less than the national average. I did a presentation in Columbus, Ohio. You all know where that is? You all know what state that's in? Ohio? Outside, if you took Columbus out of Ohio, which they want to do actually, but if you took Columbus out of Ohio, all of the growth, in terms of share of growth in Ohio, would be people over 65. Well, that's not going to happen here. But what is happening here, what's happening all across the country, is we're changing our composition of our population. And we all know that intuitively. We see it happening between, by 2043, the Census Bureau tells us that most Americans will be minority, majority. I can't get those terms to work with me. So in my mind, we're moving towards what I would call a new majority, where most Americans are not like me, white, non-Hispanic. Most Americans will be people of color or people of different races and ethnicities. That is the new majority. That's the new America coming before us. So between 2010 and 2040, about 90% of all the population change will be attributable to the new majority. Tucson already has a pretty sizable base of the new majority. So it will, about 80% of its population growth will be in new majority, but you already have a large base to begin with anyway, relative to the national average. Okay, I tell my students, never present a complex chart. Only leave that to the professor. So, I have two charts I'm going to show you. They're both a little complex, but I highlighted some numbers. I divide the household world up into the households with children, households without children, and single-person households, which are really a subset of course, households without children. Again, 2010 to 2040, nationally, only 19% of the net change in households will have children in them. Now, I'm a baby boomer. When I grew up in the 50s and 60s, half of American households had children in them. Now it's less than 30%. We're trending towards about 25%. And that has an effect on household change. And so between now and 2040, only 19% of the net change in total households will have children in them. Now, that's largely attributable to the fact that a large number of households are baby boomer households. They've already had their children. And the millennials have not yet had their children. And an increasing number of households will decide never to have children. That's a different choice pattern I've seen emerge. Well, in the Tucson area, you're a little different. Oops. Oh, you're about national average. About 18% of the net change in total households will have children in them. So if you're in the home building business, and something like 80% of the next 30-year demand for housing will be for households without children, we need to pay attention to what's going on in the market. And oh, by the way, households without children are also growing in number because people are living longer. When I was growing up, my grandparents, they raised their children and then they died, within 2 decades after that. My mother's still alive, she's almost 90. As we raise our children and as the children leave our houses, we tend to live a lot longer. And so the percent of life that we have raising children used to be about a third to 40% of our adult life. Now it's more like a quarter of our adult life, and trending. So, in other words, the nature of the households themselves are changing as we age. So, looking at Tucson and let's look at the single-person households nationally, and for Tucson, roughly the same. 40% of the nation's net change in households will be households that are single persons. And that's the same in Tucson. I don't believe for a second that the housing demand functions of households who are singles is the same as households with children. And so as we're moving into another new era for housing demand, we need to be cognizant of changing housing preferences, and I'll get to some of those towards the last part of my presentation. Now, this is more difficult to explain, even to intelligent people. So I divide the world up into three broad household age groups and associated housing demand. We have households whose householders, the head of household, are under 35. I call these starter home households. Apartments, condos, townhouses, small homes, small lots. You have the idea. Then you have the households between 35 and 64 who are in their absolute peak demand part of their housing life stage. They are having children, they're growing households, they have good incomes, or used to have good incomes, and now they're coming back somewhat. They want the larger home, probably on a suburban lot, and they can afford that home, and we delivered that home to them. And I'll show you that momentarily. Then those over 65 are empty nesting, downsizing, changing the kind of house. They don't want to maintain the big house or the big lot or both. So I call them the downsizing households. Well, in the period between 1990 and 2010, for the U.S. as a whole, there was no increase in the number of starter home households. In fact, they were negative. We lost 1.2 million households who are in that age group. But looky here, the boomers were themselves growing up and raising their own children, usually in the suburbs. We were 78% of the total change in housing demand in that 20-year period. And the downsizers over 65 were picking up the rest, 22%. Tucson was a little behind the national average. About 2/3 of the households here, household change here, were the households in the peak demand part of their housing consumption. 30% were in the downsizing part, but that's logical. Tucson attracts the senior population. Let's look towards the future. So for the U.S. as a whole, between 2010 and 2040, only 29% of the net change in households will be those households in what I call the peak housing demand part of their life, down from 78% to less than 30%. That's going to have a tremendous effect on housing demand, and builders will begin to see this, because these changes actually don't occur overnight. These changes occur gradually, incrementally, glacially, year by year by year, until some point in time, 2025, 2030, you wake up and say, what the heck happened? Where did all the buyers go for our nice big homes? They're no longer around. It's all demographics. I had a good demographic friend. He says he does a better job predicting the American economy by looking at demographic change rather than economic change in the economy. I think he's right. So let's look at Tucson. 35% of the net change in households will be in the peak housing demand part of life. Relatively healthy, 35%, higher than the national average, but just about half of what it was in 1990 to 2010. Just about half. And look at the households over 65, the downsizing households. More than half of the net change in households in the U.S. will be those who are downsizing, not upsizing, downsizing. And just about half for the Tucson area. What is Phoenix? Well, Phoenix is a little different. We also have seen, the home ownership rate change, and I'm not sure that we'll ever see the home ownership rates we saw in the 2000s. There's lots of reasons for that, but I want to point out this chart here. In 2005, the U.S. hit 69% home ownership rate, the highest level of home ownership in the nation's history. Well, what happened in 2005 that changed all this? Well, in 2005, we were living in Alexandria, Virginia, and our cat got a note in the mail from a bank. And it qualified. Our cat was pre-approved for a $1.5 million mortgage at better terms than we had in our house. Well, she didn't put her paw print on the return page, never sent it in, and the economy crashed. All because of our cat. No, but there are some serious structural changes in the finance world, and you know this better than I do. I'm a victim. When we sold our house in Alexandria, Virginia, we sold it for a very nice amount of money, thank you very much. We moved to Salt Lake City, and a day before closing in middle June of 2008, I was going to take my job in July 1, 2008, the banker called and says, Dr. Nelson, we have a problem. We have to redo your mortgage. I say, why is that? Because the underwriters red flagged it. What does that mean? Well, it means that we have to take another look at your financial stability. Okay, I'm putting 70% down, 70% down. I have an 820 credit score, used to anyway. And the guy who signed my contract of employment is himself the president of the University of Utah. And that's not enough? Well, we're sorry, Dr. Nelson. The rules have changed. So we come to Tucson. We got the house finally. We moved to Tucson and tried to get a loan in Tucson. We couldn't get a loan in Tucson. Couldn't. Maybe we could go to the private market and get a point or two higher mortgage for a home in Tucson. But because I moved it to Tucson on May 20th, I closed the house on May 20th, but I wasn't starting work until this past Monday, I was unemployed. 80% down is what we're going to put down, over 800 credit score. The banks, the local banks wouldn't touch us. The privates would touch us for a little more money. So we just decided to pay cash for our house. You know, we could do that. We sucked up and did that. But if I can't buy a home, what about the president here? Nope. We have to find a way to make it a little easier for successful people, me, to buy homes across the country. Let alone make it maybe easier for other people who are a little less well off than me to also buy their homes. They used to be good credit risks, and they still are. But the regulations have changed in ways that I think are very damaging. So as a consequence, these are my projections for home ownership rates for the U.S. out to 2040. And look at the bottom line for the U.S. Almost half of the net change in housing by tenure between 2010 and 2040 will be for rent housing. Now, we're not going to build apartments to meet that demand. What's going to happen, we all see it here, many millions of single-family owner-occupied homes will move into renter occupancy. And I've got a whole other book coming out on The Unfamiliar America, coming out probably later in 2015, that gets into some of the dynamics of what's going on with the housing occupancy situation in the U.S. Tucson, it'll be about 43% of the net change in housing demand will be for renters, about the same for a little old Phoenix up the road there. Job growth, you'll be seeing some pretty healthy job growth. This is job growth for the Tucson area only. We're looking at sectors between 2010 and 2040, basically 65% increase in jobs the way I look at them. And I count a job as any job. Not a person employed, but a full-time job, a part-time job. Some people can have 3 jobs, and I count all 3 as individual jobs. That's the way the U.S. government tallies it for economic purposes, but not for Social Security purposes. They're very different. So you see a change of 300,000 new jobs, about 2/3 growth on those jobs. So let's talk about what's going to be happening to the landscape in Tucson to the year 2040. This is a do we have any of those here? Sort of vacant, dying strip malls, commercial strip malls. Do you have any here? Yeah. This is Atlanta, Georgia. This is a 10-acre tract of land, 5 miles from downtown Atlanta, Georgia. the metropolitan Atlanta, Georgia area is still booming, and you see these by the hundreds all over the landscape. Well, to a lot of my friends and colleagues, this is an eyesore and it's bad, and I say no. This is your new future. This is your opportunity. This is the promised land. Because what are the characteristics of these sites? They're flat. They might not used to have been, but they're flat now. They're under common ownership, common interest ownership. The owners want to make money. That's a good thing. The decision has been made that this will be not residential, but rather commercial, or maybe mixed commercial residential. You have a large street in front, 4, 6, 8-lane highways that's wide enough to put in a bus rapid transit or a trolley or something fixed guideway. It's already there. If you have to rip up the water and sewer to increase the capacity, that's easier to do here than neighborhoods, because the water and sewer are in the right-of-ways adjacent to the property. So you have a lot of the elements going in your favor to redevelop these parcels. And one last thing. Back here is a neighborhood, and that neighborhood is not very pleased to have in their backyard this. If you do your planning right and you do your engagement right, you can turn potential NIMBYs, not in my backyard, into YIMBYs. Yes, in my backyard, get rid of this, please. When you do the communication right, and when you do the engagement right, where the neighbors become part of the process, I've never seen a situation where you didn't have, following that engagement, a successful mixed-use redevelopment anywhere in the U.S. Now, one of the things driving the market, in my view, is the lifespan of non-residential buildings is very small, very, very short. A retail space will have about a 20-year lifespan. Offices might be 50 years. Downtown high-rise buildings might be more than 100, of course. Warehouses maybe 25. On average, the typical non-residential building in the U.S. is 1 or 2 floors and will be torn down within 40 years, 45 years. Now, in contrast, residential has a very long life. I did 3 different analyses using 3 different databases to find out how long will a typical residential unit built after 1940 last. It was the loss rate calculation. 3 separate databases, all saying the same thing. It's 170 years. The typical home built after 1940 will last 170 years. Now, the home is not built to last that long, but the people living in those homes will do the things needed to make them last that long. The homes are their vessels, their connection to the neighborhoods. They'll put on the new roof, they'll put in the new HVAC, they'll remodel the house. My house, our house that we bought, we paid cash for it. Banks wouldn't help us buy the house, we paid cash anyway. Our house in Tucson was built in 1977 and redone almost top to bottom in 2011. So we basically bought a brand new home. But the previous owner put in all of the work to update, upgrade everything in the house. So when I show this slide to my planning colleagues, I remind my planning colleagues, when you approve a residential development, you take that parcel of land off the map forever. It's no longer in the game. It's been committed. And that's not the case with the non-residential parcels. When you build something like this, and let's say you make a mistake. Oh, we shouldn't have approved that. No worries, in the blink of an eye, it'll come down. 20 years, 30 years tops. So we have a wonderful opportunity all across the U.S., and especially in Tucson, to identify opportunities for redeveloping existing developed parcels. Let's take a 50-year life building, and it opens its doors tomorrow morning. Generally speaking, about 80% of that total package value is in the structure. The structure depreciates 2% per year, over 50 years. The land is worth 20%, but the land grows in value by roughly the annual average population growth rate. I've done checking on this. So you have, this is after inflation appreciation, and this is depreciation. So in the 28th year, The 50-year building has a situation where the land is worth more than the building itself. So sometime before that, the building owner says, something's going on. I should begin planning ahead to reinvest in my property so that I can I can redo the property and generate the additional wealth I should have based on the property value, the land value. So sometime between these two brackets, the building is demolished or in some fashion repurposed substantially. So for planners and actually investors, what we did in Utah is we took the county assessor records for every single non-residential parcel in Salt Lake County. That's about 300,000 parcels. We coded all the parcels, they were already coded, we assigned useful lives to each of the structures on all of these parcels, then made certain assumptions about land value and depreciation rates and so on and so forth, and built a map for every city and the county as a whole, showing in 5-year increments, 5-year color codes, where each non-residential property would become an opportunity for redevelopment. So along this area here, these properties will become opportunities for redevelopment by the year 2030. Well, we're planners, right? Why don't we get together with the property owners? That's a novel idea. And work together with the neighbors. That's another good idea. Just tell everybody, okay, by 2030, all this area here is doomed. It's going to be rebuilt. What should it look like? And how should it relate to the existing neighborhoods? And in the ideal world, and this is happening in places like Nashville, in the ideal world, you have corridor master plans that once they're approved, you get across-the-counter permitting. What a novel idea. So I'm trying to move my planning profession this direction. So I estimate for the Tucson metropolitan area as a whole that between 2010 and 2040, you will add about 140 million square feet to your inventory of non-residential space, and I count all non-residential space, not just the public or private stuff. But look, 300 million square feet of non-residential structures between 2010 and 2040 will be torn down and rebuilt. Now that number is bigger than that number, which means that stuff built this year might be torn down between now and 2040. So we're going to see some properties recycled twice. 435 million square feet of total non-residential construction, or roughly two-thirds of all non-residential construction will be the redevelopment of existing space. That's the opportunity we have in planning and in development in metropolitan, the future of metropolitan America. So earlier this week, or actually it was last Friday, I attended a presentation, some of you might have as well, on the future market demand, among many other things, the future market demand for households living accessible to transit. These are households without a car, or households that have more workers than cars. Those are the two drivers. And I was shocked. I looked at the numbers. I trust the numbers. I trust the operation, BA Urban Economics. The numbers are conservative, but I was shocked to realize that roughly 60% of the next wave of demand for all new housing will be for housing accessible to transit, because people will need that transit. They might not want to use transit, but they have to because they don't have a car, or they have more workers than cars. That's a big number. So observations, you'll have a lot of growth in the area, you know that. Most of that will be what I call the new majority. 40% of the growth will be people over 65. 80% will be households without children. 40% will be single-person households. The next wave of peak housing demand will be roughly half of what it was in the last wave. You'll build about 400 million square feet of non-residential space. But between residential and non-residential, you'll probably spend, and plus some infrastructure, you'll probably spend about $150 billion in development over that 30-year period. And by the way, your current FAR floor area ratio in this area is actually below 0.2. which means that 80% of most of the non-residential property is open. We could double that to 0.4 and still have adequate parking, and we could probably meet all of the demand for all new non-residential development and jobs, and almost all of the new demand for attached residential by moving to about a 0.6 FAR, and we'll still have enough parking to serve the needs of the development. But that takes urban design, architecture, and so on, and that's what we provide at the University of Utah. University of Arizona. Whoa! That's good. It'll take me a year to get over that, but I'm looking forward to it. So I'm now at the University of Arizona. How can we help you all? Thank you very much.